put your hands together for Sharif Shaalan. Welcome, sir.
So today we're going to talk about Agile Scrum methodology. So I want to go over the actual Scrum methodology, but also how do you play your part in ensuring success as either a developer, a business analyst, or a project manager. How many people in here are using Scrum right now, or are in some kind of Scrum team? Okay. So my name is Sharif, Shaalan, five-time Salesforce MVP. I'm a technical architect manager with roundCorner. So I do a lot of, I'm a Scrum Master, do a lot of Agile, work with a lot of development teams. So I think this will be very helpful for you. If you haven't used Scrum, this is an Agile. This will be a good introduction for you. But also, if you are using it, this will be a great way to see what you can do to ensure success within your teams. So the agenda, first we're going to go over what Agile is, why do we use Agile, the core principles of Agile, and then how do I practice Agile to ensure success. And this will also be focused on developer, business analyst, and project manager as part of the Scrum team. Then we'll do key takeaways and QA. So on the way here, I had a joke with Shiv. On Agile, we were driving here in traffic. I told him that driving in America is like waterfall and driving here is Agile, because everything is just moving, going with the flow. So what is Agile? These are the kind of official definitions of Agile, and I've highlighted a few things here just so we don't have to read all of this. But when you're talking about Agile, you're talking about frequent inspection and adaptation. It encourages teamwork, self-organization, and accountability. And I probably should have highlighted rapid delivery. This is what we want to do with the Agile methodology. So why do we use Agile? Why are a lot of companies, a lot of people going to the Agile methodology? So there are a lot of different reasons: self-organizing, iterative, code reviews. So we have, a bunch of reasons why people would use Agile. But these are kind of the main reasons that I thought stood out to me. So with Agile, you can manage growth with predictable releases. So if you're doing it right and you're getting the velocity of your teams, and you're measuring your points and figuring out how much you could get done within a sprint, you can start predicting what your teams will be able to do and get a lot more efficiency. We have increased visibility. So this is across all of your different team members, across all different parts of the Scrum team. You're able to see what's going on from the developer to the business analyst, the client, everybody gets visibility into what's going on. Delivering as one team. Managing changing priorities. So this is a very important part of Scrum, in that things come up that you haven't foreseen, the team hasn't foreseen, and Scrum allows you to manage those priorities. And of course, deliver value to happy customers, which is what we're all trying to do. So what are the core principles of Agile? A few that stood out to me here are eliminating waste. So just the whole iterative process and continuously improving on what you do helps you eliminate waste and just have sharper delivery of what you're doing. You're building quality in for the same reasons. Respecting people, so working with the different people, having the daily scrums, retrospectives, the sprint reviews. So there are a lot of touch points within Scrum. And they're not just meetings to have meetings, right? They all have their reasons, which we'll go over. Optimizing the whole, so looking at the full project and having that foresight of what's coming in the pipeline, things like the product backlog, the sprint backlog, always looking at the full picture. Creating knowledge, so things like the sprint retrospective allow you to build from one project to the next and continuously improve what you're doing. Just-in-time decisions, so these are things that are you know, come up, may come up at the last minute that you need to kind of switch directions and make sure you're adjusting for that, for the different things that happen in the project, and delivering fast with good quality, of course. So getting to the main part of my presentation is how do I practice Agile to do my part? So the Scrum life cycle pretty much looks like this. So you have a product backlog, which is really everything that comes up during your project. It could be stuff that's in scope, out of scope. Within my team, we create the JIRA tickets for everything, put it all into the backlog, and that gets prioritized within backlog moving calls. Then we have the sprint backlog, which is the actual sprint you're working on, and how is that prioritized, and what are the tickets that you should be working on to improve efficiency and get things done within that sprint. We have our daily Scrum meeting, which is a meeting every day with the developer, the Scrum Master, everybody that's involved. They would all attend this meeting and talk about what happened the day before. We'll go over each one of these in detail. The sprints are typically, I was working 2-week sprints. Most people do 2-week sprints when they're working with an Agile, but it's really up to you and your team. Typically it's a 2-week sprint, but some people do 1-week sprint, 4-week sprints. And the outcome of a sprint is a potentially shippable product. So what we're saying here is when you finish the sprint, whatever you're releasing should be able to stand on its own. So you should be able to release that, and it doesn't really have any dependencies on it. So the goal of the sprint is a potentially shippable product. So first, let's take a look at the product backlog. So the product backlog should be strategic, not tactical. So this means we're putting everything in the backlog and kind of having a forward vision and seeing everything that might come down the pipeline. We don't want to get lost in the details. So in the product backlog, you're really just getting everything into the backlog, and eventually you're going to groom it, right? When you do the backlog grooming. So don't get lost in it. Put the as a user, I can do such and such. Put it into your backlog, and then it's going to get groomed and prioritized. Operational grouping, so we want to put these probably in different epics, so we know which buckets of functionality you're going to be releasing. It should be a single prioritized list. So we use JIRA. Many people use JIRA, and you have your product backlog. It's basically one list, and it's stack ranked. So you're prioritizing everything that needs to go into the next sprint. You want to prioritize existing bugs. So anything that's going to affect the system immediately should always go first, so that you're working on things that are affecting. If you're in a live production system, that should always go first. Dependencies should be prioritized high. So if down the line you have functionality that's gonna that other functionality is gonna depend on, you want to get that kind of knocked out earlier. And reducing technical debt. So having that forward vision and knowing what's coming up will help you reduce that technical debt, so you don't have to rework any of your functionality. So what can you do for the product backlog as a developer, business analyst, and project manager? As a developer, you should always review the backlog so you can see what functionality is coming, and you can develop with the future in mind. So if you see the product backlog and you look all the way, all the tickets that are coming up, then as you do your development, you can figure out ways to make that development more efficient to set up for the upcoming development that's behind it. So having that future vision. For a business analyst, same thing, keeping your eye on the big picture of what's in the pipeline, what's going to come down the pipeline. And as a project manager, you just want to, of course, manage the scope and the overall project delivery. So you may have all this stuff in the pipeline and in the backlog, but as you prioritize that backlog, you want to make sure what's the scope for the current work is prioritized first. Next, we have backlog grooming. So this is This is a very important part because this is where you take the product backlog and you have these backlog grooming sessions, which are usually, depending on how many tickets you have, you may have like one call a week or one call every couple of weeks. So that's for the Scrum team to decide how many of these you should have. But these backlog grooming calls are you getting together with the team. User stories should be written in a way, as a user, I should be able to do something. You should use given, when, then criteria, which also helps you write your test classes and your developers write your test classes. So having different scenarios, the happy path, the sad path. So we could probably do a whole session just on user stories. But the point for Agile is you have to make sure that these, your business analyst, whoever is writing these stories, are putting them in the right way, so that when it's time to do the backlog grooming, you could do things like assign story points and JIRA subtasks. So for story points, we're talking about, a lot of people call it t-shirt sizing. So this is, you have a story and you get all your developers together and they have to, put a number out there. So they could say, you can start with something and say a 3 is a simple one, and what's the story? So it could be a 5, it could be an 8. So your developers get together and they come to a conclusion as to what they think the complexity of the story is going to be. And this is very kind of arbitrary and team by team, so these don't translate across teams. One team might say something is a 3, another team might say it's an 8. It's for you within your own team, because every developer has their own skills, their own proficiencies, to figure out how many points these stories should be. We also want to make sure, if possible, that the business analysts put JIRA subtasks. So, or if you're not using JIRA, whatever system you're using, you want to have all of your user stories and also subtasks to break out the work. That way, as you do the product backlog, you can put these t-shirt sizing story points, which allow you to say, it'll take a couple of iterations, but this is what will help you figure out what your velocity will be. So eventually you'll be able to tell, my team's able to do 20 points per sprint or 40 points per sprint, and it'll help you in the future when you're bringing stuff from the backlog and putting it into your sprints. So for backlog grooming, what can you do as a developer? So the first thing is be realistic. So you don't want to just go with the flow and story pointing. You don't want to say, just because everybody else said it's a 3, I'm going to say it's a 3. If you think it's an 8, say it's an 8. And there should be a back and forth until you figure out the complexity, because it could come back later to bite you. So you want to really be realistic as to what you think the complexity of the story will be. You want to push back on incomplete requirements. So if somebody gives you a ticket and all it has is a subject and no stories in there, you want to be able to push back and say, I need more requirements to tell you what I think the complexity will be. This one's very important. I almost named the session "Don't Be an Order Taker," because this is, you want somebody to be able to analyze the tickets and really tell you if you're doing something that's not smart. Right? The developers I work with, my favorite developers are the ones that tell me, like, this is stupid, don't do it. I don't want somebody to just do anything I tell them. So if you're a developer, this is a very important part of your career, is don't be an order taker, right? Always do your analysis and make sure you're getting your feedback in there. As a business analyst, you should be writing up your user stories correctly, using given, when, then criteria, and you want to include subtasks as much as possible, because that helps you break down your stories later on. And as a project manager for backlog grooming, you also want to call out incomplete requirements. So don't just take a bunch of empty tickets and expect people to story point them. You have to have at least the right level of information there to give them a starting point to do the story pointing. Next we have our sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog are the actual tickets that you're working on within that specific sprint. So there should be a single sprint backlog, right? Because you're only working one sprint at a time. No open dependencies, so you shouldn't be bringing tickets in if the dependencies for those tickets haven't been completed in prior sprints, or within that sprint, you would prioritize any dependencies if they're all in the same sprint. You want to tackle difficult tasks first, complete high-level designs. The definition of done. So, this is something to come up within your team. What's the definition of done? Because if you want to have that shippable product at the end of your sprint, then the definition of done has to be agreed upon by all people. Is done, the development is done? Is it the UAT is done? Is it pushed to production? So that's a very important part, is to figure out what the definition of done is. And then, of course, using test-driven development. So as a developer, within the sprint backlog, you want to push back on a priority if you're able to deliver more efficiently. So if you're working on a ticket and another ticket is prioritized, and you think that working on a different ticket would help you complete the sprint faster, you should push back and speak up and make sure that the team knows that. The business analyst, so you want to always make sure there's no scope creep and develop to the requirements so that you can get all of your stories done within that sprint. And for the project manager, you want to always stay in constant communication with all parties and make sure that we keep the sprint moving. The daily stand-ups, so these are very important. This is just a quick daily meeting. You're really going around the room and asking your developers 3 questions. What was done yesterday? What are you doing today? And are there any blockers? And from there you realign priorities and you make sure you get things moving, especially any blockers within the sprint. So as a developer, if you have a blocker, you need to call it out immediately because that's what can slow down your sprint. You don't want to move on until you have a path to resolution. So any blockers that you have, you want to make sure that you can get those resolved before you move on, because that's really the point of that daily scrum, is to remove any bottlenecks. The business analyst, you want to update the tickets accordingly. So whatever comes out of the scrum, you want to make sure that you're updating all the subtasks, assigning action items, doing whatever you have to do to keep the tickets moving. And as a project manager, of course, it's communication. Make sure everyone follows up on their action items, they're doing what they need to do. The sprint review, so after you've done your 2-week sprint and you have your release, whether it's going to a sandbox or production, whatever your definition of done is, only done features should be reviewed. It's usually a 30 to 60 minute call, demo. The participants would be the Scrum team, internal stakeholders, other internal teams and external stakeholders, so anybody that needs to see what's going on. And this is very important in that every 2 weeks you're communicating, you're showing things to your client, to your stakeholders, and everybody's on the same page. So as a developer, for the sprint review, you want to make sure everything is tested, of course, before you push it to wherever environment you're demoing from. You want to make sure there are no active development or pushes to the demo environment during review, whether it's a sandbox, it's probably going to be some kind of UAT sandbox or a SIT sandbox. So you just want to make sure that you're not doing some kind of development, because when somebody's demoing that, you don't want things breaking. The business analyst, you want to make sure that you have release notes for all of the features that you're releasing within this specific release for the sprint. And then the project manager, you want to set expectations of what's going to be reviewed, whatever tickets you have in Jira, those should all be in the release notes and communicated to everybody prior to the review. And then finally, we have the sprint retrospective. So this is where you meet with your development team and you want to basically figure out, we want to focus on what and not who. So we're not calling specific people out. We just want to know, what went well, what should we continue doing, what didn't work, and we should stop doing, and what should we improve on. This should be about 30 minutes, and it should be the Scrum team. And this is very important because this is where you learn from, different mistakes or different things you've done, or things that you've done well, and you keep doing them. So in the sprint retrospective, as a developer, you want to always be honest, call out any inefficiencies, any issues that you had within the sprint. As a business analyst, you want to discuss good process as well as the needed improvements. And the project manager should always follow up on the retrospective items to make sure they're being implemented going forward. So our key takeaways here are basically, we saw a lot of communication in there, especially on the project management and BA, but this is all the way around. Everybody should be communicating. You shouldn't just, you're a partner, not an order taker. So this is, very important in your careers if you're just starting or if you're working now. People, respect developers and respect the things that developers do and want to hear the feedback of the developers. So if somebody tells you to do something that doesn't look right, don't do it. Just tell them it shouldn't be done this way. So be involved all around. So just make sure in the scrum calls and the pointing, in the reviews, wherever you can, just make sure you stay involved with the team, learn, and then just do it better each time. And I think that covers it for Scrum and what you could do, so we can open it up to questions if anybody has any questions.
Hassan, it's very knowledgeable. So I have been working in Salesforce for last 4 years, and I always find myself to stick with Agile because every client have requests like, okay, we need to make this change, and this should be very quick. Like you should have to, immediately make things working for them. So what I do, I quickly make changes in production and then replicate those changes in the sandbox. So could you help me to find out how we can stick with Agile in such situations?
Yeah, so we should always do. There should always be a path to production. If you're already live, right, you should have a bug sandbox where you would do it in the sandbox first and push it to production. Or if it's a new implementation, you always want to have, it should really go with developer sandbox to system integration if you have multiple development sandboxes to UAT. So this should always go up the path to production. It shouldn't be done in production.
What if they are looking for a very quick change in production, or maybe a client is having some issues let's say they are working on a report and they need some custom formula fills and any reporting fills. So I don't.
Any of that stuff could be done in a sandbox and pushed pretty quickly with a change set. I think you have to just tell them the value of not doing development and production, because it starts out with small things, but if you make that a habit, then when it gets to the complex things, they're still going to follow that same process, and then when something blows up one day, they're going to come back and blame you, and they're going to say, "Why did you do this in production?"
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So actually, I wanted to ask a question regarding documentation. We have got many documentation from a short-term point of view in Agile, and from long-term point of view, we have not that much documentation. So is it good for company or for us?
Yeah. So if you're writing your stories correctly, your stories become pretty much your documentation, right? If you have your given when-then criteria, all of your scenarios, a regular BA can take that in the release notes and transform it. So you have, if your stories are written right and you're doing release notes, then from there, having just the release notes for every release becomes your documentation for the functionality. You can then take that and put it into screen steps or take it and, make it look nice, but really your foundation is going to be there within, if your stories are written correctly and you're doing release notes for every release.
What tools, apart from Jira, what other tools we can use?
For Agile?
Yeah.
Salesforce actually has a free app called Agile Accelerator, and you can plug it right into Salesforce. You can actually do Agile right out of Salesforce.
Thank you so much.
Jim has a question.
I just wanted to add on, answer. one thing I noticed on his story example is how detailed the story was. They have many lines as a user, this. I find that a big problem when people are writing stories. They say, as a user, I want an awesome application. And then they expect you to create that. So it's, if you go back to the example, it was detailed enough where that's how it becomes spec. So you need that detail in order to produce that code, which is very explicit, right? Code is explicit. Right, I think it's variable based on who's your audience member for the documentation, right? What do they need? Don't create something just because it might seem right, like an API document or something, but no one's going to read it. Right? So I would think that your situation for that. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
Thank you.
Yeah, and Jim also is an Agile, big Agile fan and expert, so thanks, Jim.
Thank you, Jim.
So I just want to ask that we mentioned the major bugs, the feature, and not the minor ones. So should we mention the minor bugs in the release notes or not?
I'm sorry, can you repeat that again?
We mentioned all the features, all the enhancements, and all the major bugs inside the release note. But as a business analyst, I'm working as a business analyst. So I want to know that we should mention the minor bugs or not in that, or we should keep them out of it.
If you should mention minor bugs, within what?
There are some smaller bugs that they are not listed by the customers or not listed.
Oh, okay. So you're saying should you write like tickets for them? Yes. So you should really, and that goes into your backlog, right? So you want to document everything, just so that you know it's there. So even if it's if it's a quick ticket and you write it just to document what the bug is and you close it, but then you have a paper trail of all the work you've done, and that might come back later. It might be that bug might be tied to something else in the future. So you always want to document any of the bugs you fix. So I would write a ticket for everything.
Any other questions?
I want to ask a question like, how can you decide or get on the size of the sprint? Like sprint should go 2 weeks, 3 weeks, or 1 week. I mean,
It should be 2 weeks.
but I've had like
That's just my opinion.
that's on paper. But I worked on like 3 projects. But it depends on the requirement as well. Like I think one of the project also had a requirement of 4 weeks of sprint size. So how do you get into the point that 2 weeks is the best thing to work? That should work for Agile.
So for me, 2 weeks just seemed like a good iterative cycle. So within 2 weeks, you can get enough done, but it's not too much and it's not too little. So a week is a little bit, to actually finish something where you get to that definition of done. 1 week seemed a little too much. And sometimes 3 weeks is a little too long. 3 or 4 weeks is a little too long for the release cycle. So 2 weeks is, and this is more from, if you have multiple environments, right, getting stuff through from the developer sandbox to maybe SIT, UAT, and then the production. A 2 week cycle, at least 2 weeks to get it into UAT. And then from there it could be tested and pushed onwards. But from, I think the majority of people tend to do 2 weeks, but it's not a rule. But that's just what I found.
Because I think sprint planning considered the end-to-end production deployment. I mean, from dev to SIT, UAT, and then run. So 2 weeks is quite like 1 week of development, 3 weeks of QA, or 2 weeks of UAT.
Yeah, so that really goes back to what your definition of done is within your sprint, right? Because your definition of done, a lot of times our definition of done is the development is done, and then we're going to push it through the path to production.
Okay, so it's not mandatory that sprint has to be concluded as a production deployment. It could be.
No, yeah, it doesn't have to be a production deployment. But whatever you're pushing should be, kind of they call it a shippable increment, right? So you shouldn't be pushing any code that's dependent on other code. So it should be a group of functionality, right? So the functionality should be able to work on its own. And it could be just going from development to SIT at that point of UAT. It doesn't have to necessarily end up in production.
Yeah, thank you.
So, Auto Rabbit, thank you for the sponsorship here. We're gonna give away free stuff now. All right. So, what did I say was gonna be the other name for this? What was I thinking about naming this session? Here we go. So the question is,
We have an answer.
yeah, what did I say I was gonna rename this session?
Don't be an order taker.
Yep, we have a winner.
Thank you for Brick. Thank you.
Is that it, or do we have something else?
Yeah.
All right, thank you, everyone.